During 50 years, my life was a meticulous construction of rituals, sacred fabrics, and a silent obedience that I believed was the only way to please God. When I received permission to perform the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, my family celebrated as if I had gained a new life, and my neighbors looked at me with a mixture of envy and reverence. I was about to step onto the holiest land of Islam, the pinnacle of existence for any devout Muslim woman. I prepared my white garments with trembling hands, imagining that upon arrival, that persistent feeling of emptiness I carried in my chest, a hole that no dawn prayer could close, would finally disappear. I expected to be flooded by a divine light, expected the tears I would cry to be of purification and ecstasy. But as the plane descended, and I saw the desert stretching out like an ocean of golden and relentless sand, what I felt was not holiness. It was a weight, a physical, suffocating weight, as if an invisible hand were squeezing my heart, whispering that this entire journey would be just another layer of performance over a soul that was secretly starving and desperate for something I couldn't even name. Before we continue, take this moment to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell so you don't miss any testimonies, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. It is very important to have you participating in this community. Now, let's get back to the testimony. Upon arriving at the Grand Mosque, the sensory impact was overwhelming, but not in the way I had idealized in my readings. The heat was a living entity, pressing against my hijab, making sweat run down my back as I joined the sea of bodies orbiting the Kaaba. Thousands of people, shoulder to shoulder, in a hypnotic and circular movement, shouting, "Labbaik, Allahumma labbaik." Here I am, O Allah. I repeated the words, forcing my voice to join the chorus, desperately trying to feel the electric connection I saw on the faces around me. People wept, reached out their hands, some seemed to enter a trance upon seeing the black stone. But me? I was there, in the center of the Islamic world, and I felt more isolated than when I was alone in my room. I looked at the cubic structure covered in black silk and gold, and instead of reverence, a profane and terrifying question sprouted in my mind, clear as a bell ringing in the silence. Why are we bowing to a stone? I tried to swallow the thought, push it to the back of my consciousness for fear that God would strike me down right there, but the doubt had already taken root, fed by the spiritual aridity I felt. The nights at the hotel were the worst. As the noise of the crowd ceased, and I was left alone with the deafening silence of my thoughts, I would sit on the edge of the bed, with the Quran open on my lap, reading verses I knew by heart since childhood, verses about judgment, reward, and the unreachable greatness of the Creator. But those words, which once brought me a sense of order and duty, now seemed cold, distant, as if written by a ruler who inhabited an impenetrable fortress, too far away to hear the whisper of a tired woman. I looked out the window at the pilgrims still walking down below and felt a painful envy of their certainty. I wanted so much to feel what they felt. I prostrated myself on the prayer rug, touched my forehead to the floor, and begged, "If you are here, please fill this void. Do not let me return home the same way I came." But the only answer was the hum of the air conditioner and my own ragged breathing. I was fulfilling the greatest pillar of my faith, and I had never felt so far from God as in that luxurious hotel room in Mecca. It felt like I was screaming at a bronze sky that had no ears to hear me. It was one afternoon, just after the Asr prayer, that the first real crack appeared in the dam I had built. The sun was setting, dyeing the sky a dusty burnt orange, and I was sitting outside, exhausted, just watching the flow of people. Beside me, a woman from Indonesia, with a face marked by the sun but with strangely calm eyes, offered me a bottle of water. I thanked her, expecting only a polite smile in return, but she leaned in, invading my personal space in a way that put me on alert, and whispered something that made my blood run cold in my veins. "The peace of Jesus be with you." I froze. The bottle almost slipped from my hand. I looked around, paranoid, checking if anyone had heard that blasphemy spoken in the heart of our holy city. "What did you say?" I asked, harsh, fear quickly turning into defensive anger. She did not back down. She smiled again, a smile that didn't seem afraid of anything, not the religious police, nor death. "Isa al-Masih. she repeated softly. He loves you. Ask him who he really is. Those words were forbidden, dangerous, toxic. I should have stood up and walked away. But something in the absolute serenity of her eyes nailed me to the bench, paralyzed by a curiosity I was not allowed to feel. That night, sleep fled from me as if I were lying on thorns. The words of that Indonesian woman echoed in my mind with annoying persistence, beating to the rhythm of my racing heart. Ask him who he really is. I tried to push that phrase away, consider it absurd, a heresy I should report to the authorities, but a dangerous curiosity stopped me. The hotel room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on me, suffocated by the heavy silence of the early morning in Mecca. To drown out my own thoughts, I turned on the small television in the corner of the room. I began flipping through channels frantically, seeking anything, news, Quran recitations, Arab soap operas that could fill the void and bring back my normality. I needed noise, needed confirmation of my known world, needed to forget that name that had been whispered with such audacity in the mosque courtyard. But the restlessness didn't pass. It was an itch in the soul I couldn't reach. It was then that something strange happened, something my rational mind tried to explain as a technical glitch, but which my spirit immediately knew to be something else. As I flipped through the usual religious channels, the screen flickered, the sound hissed, and the image distorted violently. When the signal stabilized, it wasn't an imam reciting verses in Arabic. It was a man, a Western preacher speaking in English, a language I understood reasonably well. I froze with the remote in my hand, unable to change the channel. He spoke with a passion I did not know, not about rules or laws, but about a sacrifice. And then he said the phrase that pierced my defense like a spear. You can follow religion your whole life, but without knowing the Son, you will never know the Father. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart stopped for a second. For the first time in years, hot, uncontrollable tears rolled down my face. They weren't tears of fear of hell, nor of guilt. They were tears of a painful recognition, of a deep longing for someone I had never known, but who somehow seemed to be calling me home. The next day, I tried desperately to return to my pilgrim routine. I washed my face, put on my hijab with military precision, and marched to the mosque, determined to bury the previous night's experience under layers of devotion. But when I got there and saw myself in the middle of the crowd circling the Kaaba, the feeling of disconnection was brutal. I looked at faces twisted in supplication around me, and instead of sisterhood, I felt pity. I tried to recite the prayers, but the words died in my throat, dry and lifeless. Every time I looked at the black structure in the center, an inner voice, which was not mine, whispered with terrifying clarity, "That is not me." Panic began to rise in my throat. I looked at my raised hands, and they looked like the hands of a stranger. I moved away from the Indonesian woman when I saw her from afar, afraid of what she might awaken in me again. But the damage was already done. The structure of my faith, which seemed so solid days ago, was crumbling, not by an external attack, but by an internal absence that now screamed to be filled. The climax of this inner torture came in the form of a dream, days later. I was never a woman to have visions. My dreams were always ordinary, fragments of daily life. But that night, I was transported to a place that felt more real than the bed where I slept. I was alone in a vast and relentless desert. The sun was a hammer of fire over my head, and my throat was so dry it felt full of sand. I looked at the horizon and saw nothing, just emptiness. Suddenly, a light appeared in the distance. It wasn't the sun. It was something whiter, purer, a luminosity that cast no shadows. I tried to shield my eyes, but the light advanced, swallowing the darkness and the heat. And then, from the midst of that radiance, a voice spoke. It wasn't an audible sound, but a vibration that resonated in every cell of my body. My name, Niswa. I fell to my knees in the sand of the dream. The voice continued, soft, but with the force of an ocean. Why do you seek me among the dead? I woke up in the dark hotel room with a scream stuck in my throat, my body drenched in cold sweat, trembling with a holy fear I had never felt in any mosque. I tried to escape that voice and the weight of the dream by seeking the mundane normality of a local market. I needed to see common things. Fruits, soap, people bargaining prices, anything that would anchor me back to the reality I knew. I entered a small convenience store, away from the oppressive grandeur of the Holy Mosque. The air conditioning hummed loudly, and the smell of cheap cleaning products calmed me momentarily. It was there, in a narrow aisle of canned goods, that I saw a young woman, clearly a foreign worker, probably from the Philippines. She was restocking goods on the low shelves, moving with a silent humility that made her almost invisible to other customers. But something about her caught my eye. As she bent down to pick up a box, the collar of her uniform opened slightly, and I saw a silver glint. It was tiny, almost imperceptible, but my eyes fixed on it like a magnet, a small cross hanging on a thin chain. Anywhere else in the world, it would be a banal adornment. There, in Saudi Arabia, it was an act of silent rebellion, a risk of prison or immediate deportation. An impulse that didn't come from me, a force pushing my chest and accelerating my breathing, compelled me to approach. I looked around, checking if there were any religious police or conservative Saudis nearby. The aisle was empty. I approached her, feigning interest in a tin of olive oil. "Are you Christian?" I whispered in broken English, my voice trembling more than I would have liked. The girl froze. The can she was holding stopped in midair. She looked sideways quickly, dread stamping her face for a second before her eyes met mine. She must have seen something in my look, not the accusation of a devout Muslim woman, but the desperation of a shipwrecked soul. She hesitated, swallowed hard, and with a courage that seemed too big for her small body, nodded slightly. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice barely audible. "I am." The confirmation hit me like a punch. She was there, serving in silence, carrying her God around her neck in hostile land. "Why do you wear that?" I asked, curiosity running over prudence. "Aren't you afraid? They could arrest you?" I expected her to say she forgot to hide it or try to deny it, but she stopped working, straightened her body, and gave me the same serene smile the Indonesian woman had given me days before. It was disconcerting. How could they have this peace in a place that exhaled tension? She lightly touched the spot where the cross was hidden under the fabric and said, "Perfect love casts out all fear." The phrase hung in the stagnant air of the store. Perfect love. I knew the fear of Allah. I knew submission, duty, shame of sin, the fragile hope of mercy on Judgment Day. But love? A love that eliminates fear? That was a foreign language to my spirit. I left the store stunned, buying nothing, with that phrase hammering my mind, destroying the last theological defenses I still tried to keep standing. That night, I locked my hotel room door as if protecting myself from a physical storm. I didn't perform the ritual ablutions. I didn't unroll my prayer rug towards the Kaaba. I simply fell to my knees on the synthetic carpet, in the dark, feeling like a lost and terrified child. "If Jesus is real," I whispered into the darkness, afraid the walls would hear, "if you are who they say you are, show me. I can't take the silence anymore." And he answered. There was no thunder, no angels descending from the ceiling. It was something much more overwhelming. I felt a wave of heat start in the center of my chest and spread to my extremities, as if someone had injected liquid life into my veins. A supernatural, dense, and palpable peace invaded the room, silencing the chaos of my mind instantly. I knew I wasn't alone. There was a presence there, gentle but incredibly powerful. And then I heard the voice again, not in my ears, but echoing inside me. "I have been waiting for you." I wept until I had no more strength, not from sadness, but because, for the first time in 50 years, I was not a slave trying to please a distant master. I was a daughter who had just been found. I spent the rest of my days in Saudi Arabia, living a dangerous and exhausting duality. Externally, I was Niswa, the devout pilgrim fulfilling her sacred rites. I walked with the group, visited historic sites, and bowed my head at the right moments. But internally, I was a spy in enemy territory, keeping a secret that burned in my chest like a live coal. When I looked at the Kaaba now, I no longer saw the center of the universe. I saw only stone and fabric, empty human constructions void of divinity. While others cried out names I had known since the cradle, I whispered the forbidden name beneath my veil. It was a dizzying sensation, a mixture of absolute freedom and constant terror. I knew that if any of those people around me knew what I carried in my heart, that I had found God not in the mosque, but in a hotel room through Jesus, I could be stoned or imprisoned before even reaching the airport. That secret isolated me from the world, but connected me to something eternal. The return home was celebrated as a spiritual victory by my family and neighborhood. When I got out of the car in front of my house, I was greeted with hugs, flowers, and dishes of food. My children kissed my forehead with reverence. My neighbors gathered to hear reports from the Holy Land. "Tell us, Niswa," they asked with shining eyes. "What was it like to feel the presence of Allah? Do you feel purified?" I smiled, a rigid mask glued to my face, and repeated the set phrases they wanted to hear. "It was beautiful," I said. "The Grand Mosque is impressive," but every word was like swallowing ground glass. I felt like a fraud, a liar inside my own home. They were celebrating a woman who no longer existed. The true Niswa, the one who had been born again on the floor of a hotel room in Mecca, was screaming in silence, desperate to share the truth, but gagged by the fear of losing everything she knew. The pressure of this pretense began to consume me. I couldn't sleep. I spent nights awake, holding the small silver chain with a tiny cross that the Filipino worker had secretly given me before I left. A risky parting gift that I hid like treasure. I knew I couldn't keep up that charade for long. The truth is like light. You can try to hide it under a basket, but eventually it will burn through the straw. My children noticed I was different, quieter, distant. "The Hajj changed you, Mother," they said, thinking it was a sign of deep piety. Little did they know that the change was not submission, but a freedom they would consider blasphemy. I caught myself humming hymns I never learned, feeling a peace that contradicted the tense environment of my house. I was walking on a razor's edge, and the cut was inevitable. The fatal error happened on an ordinary afternoon when my sister Laya came to visit me. We were very close, lifelong confidants. We were sitting in the living room drinking tea, and the heat made me loosen my scarf and the collar of my dress a little. In a moment of distraction, I leaned forward to pour more tea, and the small silver chain slipped out of my clothes, hanging visibly on my neck. The metallic shine caught her attention immediately. Laya frowned, eyes fixed on the small pendant shaped like a cross. "What is that, Niswa?" she asked, her voice shifting from casual to accusatory in a second. I tried to hide the chain quickly with my hand, my heart racing like a war drum. "Nothing," I stuttered, "just a gift." She stood up, suspicion hardening her features. "A gift? A cross? From whom?" The silence that followed was deafening. She approached, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear and repulsion in my own sister's eyes. "Tell me you are not straying," she hissed. I looked at her, tired of lying, and whispered the sentence that would seal my fate. "I am not straying, Laya. I am finally seeing." That single sentence, whispered with sincerity in my living room, detonated my life with the force of a bomb. Laya didn't stay to argue. She left my house pale, hands trembling, and I knew, in that instant, that the clock had started ticking against me. Betrayal runs fast in communities where honor is worth more than blood. In less than 24 hours, the silence of my home was broken not by friendly visits, but by the heavy and authoritative sound of boots on the entryway floor. They arrived in a group, an unnecessary show of force against a 50-year-old widow. My brothers, my sons, and the imam of the local mosque, a man I had respected and feared since childhood. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The air became dense, charged with latent violence. I stood up from the sofa, my legs weak, feeling like an animal cornered in its own den. There were no greetings of peace, only looks that varied between incandescent fury and icy disappointment. The confrontation was brutal and quick. Tariq, my youngest son, the one I nursed and rocked to sleep, was the first to shout. He slammed his hand on the coffee table so hard the porcelain cups clinked in panic. "Mother, what have you done?" he bellowed, face red, neck veins bulging. "Have you lost your mind? Do you want to disgrace us all?" I tried to speak, tried to explain that I had found peace, not disgrace, but my voice was swallowed by their shouts. The imam, with his white beard and eyes that looked like stones of ice, raised his hand, asking for silence. His calm was more terrifying than my son's anger. He looked at me and asked with deadly softness, "Niswa, do you know the punishment for apostasy, Rida? Do you know what Sharia requires for one who turns their back on the Prophet?" My mouth went dry. I knew. Everyone knew. It was a death sentence, social or physical. Karim, my firstborn, grabbed my arm tightly, fingers digging into my flesh. "You will repent," he hissed. "Tomorrow you will go to the mosque and perform the Shahada in front of everyone. You will clean this stain." They didn't wait for the next day to begin the punishment. That very night, they turned my refuge into a cell. They searched my things with humiliating violation, throwing clothes and personal belongings on the floor. They found the small New Testament in Arabic that the Filipino woman had clandestinely obtained for me. Seeing that book, my only source of written truth, in my brother's furious hands, was agonizing. He didn't just take it. He tore it apart in front of me, page by page, throwing the pieces on the floor as if they were contaminated trash. "This is poison!" he screamed while destroying the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They took my cell phone, locked the windows, and closed my bedroom door from the outside. I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, a metallic and definitive sound that sealed my separation from the outside world. I fell to my knees in the middle of the mess, crying until I was breathless, feeling the darkness and isolation crush me. I had never felt so alone, so small, so abandoned by the flesh and blood I loved so much. But human isolation became the stage for divine presence. Hours later, when the house was silent and exhaustion had dried my tears, it happened again. The temperature in the room changed. The cold of loneliness was replaced by that familiar warmth, a dense presence that seemed to embrace my trembling shoulders. There was no visible light this time, but the darkness seemed to shine. I was curled up in the corner of the room when I heard the voice, not in my ears, but resonating in the center of my chest, clearer than my son's screams. "Do not be afraid. I am with you." The simplicity of those words undid the knot of panic in my stomach. I asked, sobbing quietly, "What do I do, Lord? They hate me." The answer came as a difficult balm. "Forgive them. They do not know me yet." That broke me. The anger I was starting to feel dissolved into a painful compassion. I understood, in that holy moment of confinement, that they were blind people acting in darkness, exactly as I had been for 50 years. I wasn't the prisoner. They were, and I was free, even behind a locked door. In the days that followed, my family's physical aggression turned into a cold and calculating surveillance. They stopped locking me in all the time, but I was never alone. There was always a pair of eyes watching me, be it a nephew sitting in the hallway or my sister-in-law sweeping the courtyard with her gaze fixed on my window. My sister Laya, the one who denounced me, stopped speaking to me entirely, acting as if I were a ghost or a shame she preferred to forget existed. The tension reached a breaking point when the imam returned. This time, he didn't come as a spiritual counselor, but as a judge. He brought 2 other men I didn't know, dressed severely, carrying a notebook and a small recorder. They ordered me to sit in the main room. The atmosphere was that of a military tribunal. "We need to ask questions, Niswa," they said, without any kindness in their voices. My hands trembled in my lap, not from cold, but from the certainty that my every word would be used to decide my future, or my end. The interrogation began with the fundamental questions of the faith I had professed for 5 decades. "Do you still believe in the Prophet?" one of the men asked, pen hovering over the paper like a knife. I hesitated. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. They leaned forward, sensing hesitation like sharks sensing blood in the water. "Do you believe that Muhammad is the final messenger of God?" they insisted. My lips trembled. I knew the right answer to save my skin, but my heart could no longer lie. I took a deep breath and said, with a voice that came out surprisingly steady, "I believe in the God who spoke to me." The imam narrowed his eyes. "What God?" he asked. "The God who called me by name," I replied, feeling a strength sprout inside me. "The God who told me he loves me, not because I deserve it, but because he is love. The God who took away my fear." They looked at each other, confused and irritated by my language, which to them sounded like madness or pure blasphemy. The Imam's patience ran out. He slammed his hand on the table violently, making me waver in the chair. "That is not Allah," he shouted, losing his studied composure. I shrugged instinctively, but the question escaped my lips before I could contain it. "Then who is he?" The Imam stood up, face twisted with fury. "You have been deceived by Shaitan. You are listening to demons. You will burn in hellfire unless you repent now." But strangely, the more he shouted, the calmer I became. The fear I felt at the beginning of the conversation had turned into an unshakable certainty. I looked him in the eyes, with a serenity that disarmed him, and said softly, "If Satan could give the peace I feel now, a peace that forgives you even while you threaten me, then perhaps you should question who you are following." That was the last straw. He stormed out of the room, shouting curses, followed by the other two men who murmured frantic prayers to protect themselves from my evil influence. After that day, my house ceased to be a home and officially became a prison. The sentence was not spoken, it was executed. I was forbidden to set foot on the street. My neighbors, people with whom I had shared meals for years, crossed the street to avoid passing near my gate. One morning I woke up and saw that someone had spray-painted the word Kafira, infidel, in crude red letters on the wall of my house. My children didn't clean it. They left it there as a warning and public shame. The loneliness was absolute. No one spoke to me, no one ate with me. They left a plate of food at my bedroom door, as if I were a leprous animal. But the worst wasn't the silence. It was the whispers. At night, through the thin walls, I heard my family discussing what to do with me. I heard my son Tariq's voice, trembling, "We can't kill her. She's our mother." And my brother's cold reply, "Then let her die alone. She is already dead to us." Those words should have destroyed me. But that night, lying on the floor, I felt the presence wrap around me again, whispering, "They have abandoned you, but I will never leave you." Over the following weeks, my life was reduced to the four walls of my room and the sound of my family's footsteps outside. Footsteps that never stopped at my door, except to leave a tray of cold food on the floor, as if feeding a mangy dog. The human loneliness was absolute, corrosive, designed to make me go mad or give up. But they didn't know that I had never been less alone. Every night, when the house plunged into silence, my room transformed into a sanctuary. I would sit on the hard floor, raise my empty hands, and whisper, "Thank you, Jesus." Sometimes I felt a physical warmth envelop me, as if invisible arms were holding me while I cried. Other times I saw a soft light flicker in the darkness and heard those words that became my daily bread. "Hold on. This is not the end." I was being sustained by a force that didn't come from my own resilience, for I had none left. It was Him, keeping my mind sane while the world around me tried to break it. The change came on a moonless night through a sound I didn't expect. A soft, rhythmic tapping on my window glass. My heart raced. I thought it was my sons coming to torment or expel me, but the tapping was too shy, too cautious. I dragged myself to the window and opened a crack. It was Aisha, my neighbor's teenage daughter, a quiet girl who used to help me carry groceries from the market before all this happened. Her eyes were wide with fear, darting sideways in the darkness of the yard. "Aunt Nizwa," she whispered urgently, voice trembling. "Come, someone wants to see you." I hesitated, pulling back. It could be a trap. It could be a test from my family to see if I would try to flee. "Who?" I asked, gripping the sill. "Just come," she insisted, extending her hand. "They know about him." That phrase was the key. I put on my black shawl quickly, jumped the low window with an agility fear lent me, and followed her into the night. We walked through the shadows of narrow alleys, avoiding the illuminated main streets. The gravel cut my bare feet, but I barely felt the pain. The terror of being seen made my blood pump so loud I heard the beats in my ears. Aisha said nothing, just walked fast, looking back at every corner. The village seemed like a maze of dangers. Every barking dog, every slamming door in the distance seemed a sign that we had been discovered. Finally, we reached the outskirts, where houses gave way to the beginning of the desert. She stopped in front of a small abandoned adobe structure with the roof partially collapsed. "There," she pointed, and then ran back into the darkness, leaving me alone in front of the rotting wooden door. I pushed the door open, expecting to find my brothers with stones in their hands. But what I found was a dense silence and the faint light of an oil lantern on the floor. Two figures rose from the shadows, a man and a woman, with faces marked by apprehension, but softened by a kindness I recognized immediately. The man spoke first, in a low, raspy voice. "Sister Niswa, Aisha told us about you." My legs gave way, and I leaned against the dirty wall to keep from falling. "Who are you?" I asked, panting. The woman took a step forward and held my cold hands in hers, which were warm and firm. "We are followers of Isa, too," she said. "We meet in secret. You are not alone." Those words broke the last dam inside me. I fell to my knees on the dirt floor and began to cry, an ugly, convulsive cry of relief. They didn't try to stop me. They knelt beside me, put their hands on my shoulders, and began to pray. I didn't understand all the words they used, but I understood the spirit. It was the same peace, the same love, the same presence I had felt in the hotel in Mecca. In that ruined hut, I realized that Jesus wasn't just saving me. He was giving me a family. There, in the midst of danger, I had found my true home. The following weeks were a blur of fear and intense light. Every night, I escaped home wrapped in my dark shawl, moving like a shadow through the alleys until I reached that ruined shack we came to call the House of Peace. It was just a dirty room, lit by a flickering oil lantern, but for us, it was more sacred than the Grand Mosque of Mecca. There, we were 10, sometimes 12, sitting in a circle on the dusty floor, singing hymns in whispers almost inaudible so as not to alert the neighbors. We had only one Bible among us, an old copy with the cover falling apart, pages stained by fingers and tears. We passed the book from hand to hand as if it were warm bread keeping us alive. I remember the first time I prayed aloud there. My voice trembled, but when I said, "Thank you, Jesus," I felt his presence descend upon the room like a heavy, warm cloak. Rafi, a former imam who led the group, said with eyes full of tears, "This is what truth tastes like." We knew we could die for this, but strangely, the risk only made God's presence seem more real. The group began to grow, attracting the desperate and the seekers. A taxi driver who had visions, a woman who heard a voice in a dream, a young man who found a gospel hidden in his father's chest. But with growth came danger. Rafi warned us one night, face grim. "They are watching. We need to be cunning." We started changing meeting places constantly. Sometimes we met in the open desert, under the vastness of the stars, where the howling wind drowned out our prayers. Other times, we squeezed into the back of a spice shop, pretending to bargain for saffron while reading verses from John written on pieces of brown paper. It was a dangerous dance with death. Every shadow seemed like a spy. Every car passing slowly made our hearts stop. But there was a wild joy in it, a vibrant life I had never experienced in the safety of my old religion. We were living the Book of Acts, not as ancient history, but as our present reality. Then came the Friday night that changed everything. The air was strangely still, heavy, like before a sandstorm. We were gathered in an abandoned basement, 10 of us. Rafi was reading Matthew 5. "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." As he read those words, I felt a shiver run down my spine, a chilling premonition. Before he could finish the verse, the wooden door exploded inward with a deafening crash. Beams of light from tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, blinding us. Armed men, the dreaded religious police, invaded the small space, shouting curses. The chaos was instant. Women screamed, someone tried to run and was tackled. Rafi tried to hide the Bible under his shirt, but an officer saw it, advanced on him, and struck him in the face with the butt of a rifle, throwing him to the ground. The holy book slid across the dirty cement, stopping at the feet of the invaders' heavy boots. I was pushed against the rough wall, the impact knocking the wind out of my lungs, while the smell of sweat and violence filled the room. The leader of the raid, a burly man with eyes bloodshot with fury, kicked Rafi in the ribs as he tried to get up, spitting blood. "Infidel dogs!" he bellowed, voice echoing off the stone walls. He picked up the Bible from the floor and shook it in the air like proof of a capital crime. "Who brought this trash here? Who poisoned you?" The silence that followed was terrible, broken only by Aisha's muffled sobs. The officer grabbed Rafi by the collar, lifting him almost off the ground. "Tell me who gave you this book, or I kill you right here." Rafi, face swollen and one eye shut from the swelling, looked directly at the officer. He didn't beg. He just whispered, with a dignity that seemed to come from another world. "No one brought it. He came to us." The officer frowned, confused. "Who?" Rafi smiled with bloody teeth and said, "Jesus." The officer roared with hate and struck him again, knocking him unconscious. After that, we were dragged out like cattle, thrown into dark pickup trucks, while neighbors peeked through window cracks, silent witnesses to our end. We were taken to a nameless detention facility, a low concrete block on the outskirts of the city, far from public eyes. There was no record, no lawyers, no phone calls. I was separated from the others and thrown into a cell that was little more than a hole in the wall, damp and full of a sour smell of mold and ancient despair. The space was so small I could barely stretch my legs. The darkness was total, except for a tiny crack near the ceiling that let in a thread of gray light during the day. In those first hours, terror consumed me in a way I had never experienced. I didn't know if my children knew where I was, if Rafi was alive, or if I would be executed the next morning. I curled up in the driest corner, hugged my knees, and cried until my throat hurt, a dry, soundless cry. I prayed, begged God to let me die before the torture began. The faith that seemed so strong in communion now seemed fragile before the cold concrete and the certainty of the end. I felt forgotten, erased from existence, but he did not forget me. On the third night, or maybe it was the fourth, time had lost meaning. I woke up with a strange sensation. The cell, which had always been a tomb of darkness, was bathed in a soft light. It wasn't the harsh light of a guard's flashlight, nor sunlight. It was a golden, warm luminescence that seemed to emanate from the air itself. I blinked, thinking hunger and thirst were making me hallucinate, but the light remained, steady and comforting. And then, that voice, the same from the desert, the same from the hotel, filled the cramped space. "They can take everything from you, but they cannot take me." I fell face down on the dirty floor, sobbing, but this time with relief. "I am here, in the darkness, with you," the voice continued. I felt an invisible hand touch my head, and a wave of heat ran through my body, healing the pains, calming the trembling, drying the tears. In that filthy hole, I felt a peace deeper than in any palace. I understood then that freedom is not a physical place. It is a person. And he was there, imprisoned with me. The following days were calculated psychological torture. They took me out of the cell at random times for interrogations. They showed photos of the other group members, lied saying Rafi was dead, that Aisha had confessed everything and blamed me. "Sign this," they said, pushing a paper with the recitation of the Shahada. "Repent, and you can go home." But I looked at the paper and saw only chains. Each time I shook my head and said, "No." There was a specific guard, a young man who stood in the corner of the interrogation room, observing me with intense curiosity. One afternoon, while taking me back to the cell, he whispered quickly, looking sideways, "Why are you doing this? You will die here. Why throw your life away?" I stopped, looked into his eyes, tired eyes hungry for something he didn't have, and replied with a weak but firm voice, "Because I have already found life, and it is better than anything you can offer me out there." He stood still, stunned, key in hand, staring at me for a long moment before closing the door. The answer to that testimony came 2 nights later. I was sleeping when I heard the creak of the iron door opening. I sat up with a start, expecting to be taken for execution. It was the same young guard. He was sweating, pale, with a flashlight in his shaking hand. "Get up," he whispered, urgency in his voice cutting the silence. "Quick." I hesitated, confused. "Where to?" I asked. He entered the cell and pulled me by the arm. "They are transferring prisoners tomorrow to the central prison. You will disappear if you go there. Leave now." As we walked through the empty corridors, I asked quietly, "Why are you helping me?" He stopped for a second, looked at me with teary eyes, and said, "Because last night I saw the light in your cell. I saw him too." That gave me chills all over. God had invaded my jailer's heart. He guided me to a rusty gate at the back, opened it, and pointed to the dark desert. "Run," he said. "Go north, don't look back." And I ran. I ran into the cold night, barefoot, heart exploding with gratitude, free again under the stars that witnessed the miracle. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs turned to lead, guided only by adrenaline and the invisible compass of faith. The desert at night is a place of deadly silence, where every shadow seems a pursuer, but that early morning it felt like a temple. I crossed endless dunes, the cold cutting my skin through the thin prison clothes. At dawn, when I thought I would faint from exhaustion, I saw a small vehicle stopped near a dirt road, far from the main route. A man and a woman were waiting. When I approached, staggering, the man said just one sentence, a code the guard had whispered to me before I left. "Does the light still shine?" I fell to my knees in the sand, crying, and replied, "Even in the darkness." They lifted me, gave me water, and hid me in the back of the car under old blankets. We crossed the border hours later, at a blind spot known only to God's smugglers. As we left Saudi Arabia behind, I felt a part of me die, the mother, the sister, the Saudi citizen, and another be born definitively. I was safe, but I was a stranger in a strange land, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the God who lived inside me. Safety, I soon discovered, has a high price. Longing, saudade. I was taken to a neighboring country, to a safe house that welcomed persecuted ex-Muslims. Life there was simple, communal, and saturated with prayer. But at night, when silence fell, the pain of losing my family returned like a high tide. I thought of my sons, Tariq and Kareem. Did they still hate me? Did they think I was dead? I had gained Christ, but I had lost my flesh and blood. This is the part no one tells you in testimony books. The wound of family rejection never completely heals. You just learn to walk with a limp, leaning on grace. Maria, a Sudanese woman who had lost her husband because of the faith, told me once, "Niswa, our scars are the only things we can take to heaven. They are the proof that we loved him more than our own life." Those words became my anchor. I was not a victim. I was a living offering. The pain was not a punishment. It was the cost of true love. Over the years, my role changed. I went from being the scared fugitive to becoming a mother to the new ones arriving. Young people kicked out of home, women beaten by husbands, men who lost their businesses. They arrived with that same look I had, the look of someone who has seen the truth and paid everything for it. I cooked for them, listened to their horror stories, and held their hands while they cried. I taught them what the Spirit had taught me in the solitude of prison, that God does not promise to deliver us from the fire, but promises to be with us inside the furnace. My life became a cycle of healing. I saw miracles happen in that small house, provisions appearing from nowhere, inexplicable physical healings, and the greatest miracle of all, hatred turning into forgiveness in the hearts of those who were brutalized. I never returned to Saudi Arabia and never saw my children's faces again, but God gave me hundreds of spiritual children. The underground church is not a building. It is a body marked, bleeding, but indestructible. Today, sitting here on this quiet porch, years after it all happened, sometimes I wonder if it was real. The human mind tries to rationalize, tries to say that stress and fear created hallucinations in the desert and in prison. But then, it happens. Last night, while I was praying silently in my room, the unlit lamp flickered. The air became dense, heavy, with that unmistakable scent that is not perfume, nor flower, but the smell of life. I felt the hand on my shoulder again, physical, real, heavy. There was no one in the room. I froze, heart beating in my throat, feeling that overwhelming peace crush me and lift me at the same time. And then I heard the voice, not in the mind, but audible, echoing off the empty walls, saying just one word, clear as crystal, before everything went silent abruptly. Almost. The light vanished. The weight disappeared. I was left alone in the dark, trembling, touching my own shoulder where the pressure of the hand still burned on my skin. I don't know what almost means. I don't know if it's the end of my life or his return. I only know the mark is there, invisible and eternal, and I keep waiting.
Niswa's story confronts us with an impossible choice for many, but inevitable for those who find the truth. Now, I ask you, if you had to choose today between your family's approval and the voice of God in your heart, which path would you follow? Would you have the courage to leave everything behind? Leave your honest opinion here in the comments. I really want to know what you would do in her place. If this account touched your soul, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. This is very important so that YouTube notifies you whenever we bring new transformative stories like this one. Don't leave yet. The story appearing on your screen now will challenge your faith in a different way. Click on it and continue watching. Peace be with you. God bless.